and Lair Show on WNYC. I'm Bridget Bergen, senior reporter in the WNYC and Gothamist newsroom, filling in for Brian today, who will be moderating the final New York City mayoral debate tonight. By the way, you can listen to it here on WNYC, watch it on New York One or on their YouTube channel. It starts at 7 p.m. It is sure to be one to watch. But we're going to begin today by talking about some of the latest New York City news and what it will mean going into tonight's final debate. My guests are Elizabeth Kim, my colleague on the politics desk in the WNYC and Gothamist newsroom. And before we get into the campaign news, I want to bring in our colleague Ben Feuerherd, WNYC and Gothamist public safety reporter, who was covering yesterday's ICE raid on Canal Street for a couple questions about what he saw there. Hey, Ben. Hey, Liz.
Hey.
Hey, Bridget.
So, Ben, let's start with you. Tell me what you saw on Canal Street yesterday, and how did you know to be there in the first place?
Yeah, so a colleague of ours got a tip that, something might be happening in that neighborhood, which is, sort of has a reputation for an area where illegal street venues sell counterfeit goods. So sort of made sense. Yeah, so what we saw were sort of two raids by federal agents and immigration authorities on Canal Street and in the surrounding neighborhood. The first raid was, pretty shocking in the sense that these masked federal agents were out arresting people, but it wasn't too chaotic. And then soon after, the agents returned to Canal Street, and that one was actually really chaotic. The agents set up right on Canal Street near Lafayette Street and Center Street, which is really a busy part of the neighborhood. Lots of tourists, vendors, just really buzzing with people. And as the agents took people into custody there, they tried to drive off. People started confronting them in the middle of the street, and these really chaotic clashes between the agents and New Yorkers happened. Agents were shoving people to the ground, arresting people, sprinting down Canal Street to chase after people. At one point, I saw an agent, pull a taser and scream at people to get back.
Wow. So, and that's probably a lot of the viral video that was captured. It sounds like it might have been related to that second wave.
Yeah, absolutely. Right at Center Street and Canal Street.
How long did this thing go on for?
Probably about 2 hours or so, two different waves of enforcement right on Canal Street, yeah.
And do we know at this point how many people were taken into custody and what's happened to any of them?
We don't, so we're definitely going to be following up today. A colleague of ours and I saw at least 4 people will be arrested, and then also more, protesters or New Yorkers confronting agents be arrested as well.
So I know there were some elected officials who showed up, some advocates who showed up. What kind of responses have we heard, first from the mayor's office, the current mayor's office?
So I'm actually not sure if the current mayor's office has weighed in. I know they said, we do not interact with ICE. We do not, provide support to them. But we saw people literally on the street yesterday, just what appeared to be everyday New Yorkers, voicing their extreme discontent with ICE and federal agents in the city.
So this is really unlike anything we have seen so far in New York City on this scale and this magnitude. Can you talk about some of the reporting lines you're going to be following today? Yeah,
so of course we'd like to see what happens to the people who were arrested. But also, I guess the main thing we're looking for is is this the new normal in New York? Are we going to see these sorts of operations in our city like they've seen in Chicago and Los Angeles? And then what is the reaction by city leaders and by everyday New Yorkers? And yeah.
Sure. Well, Liz, I want to bring you in because that kind of sets the stage for what I can only imagine will be an issue that will come up during tonight's debate. How are you going to be listening for how the moderators ask and the candidates handle that kind of question?
Well, that there's going to be a question about President Trump, and now there's a very specific question they can ask that, just happened yesterday. And this will be an example of how would you, as mayor handle what appears to be, a very aggressive crackdown by ICE in New York City. I mean, we've already seen some statements from the candidates. Zoran Mamdani, yesterday, he called it aggressive and reckless. Andrew Cuomo also denounced the raid, saying it was more about fear than justice, more about politics than safety. And Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa has also criticized the raid. He said that the federal government, should be prioritizing deportation of gang members, sex traffickers, and those involved in major crimes. Just to get back to another question you had asked about Mayor Eric Adams, I think it says everything about this race and the fact that he's not running, in that, he did not come out himself with a statement. He did not appear at all. He is the mayor of the city. His spokesperson, though, did release a statement. It's sort of his boilerplate statement on, federal immigration, policies, which is that, he's been clear that undocumented New Yorkers should not be trying to pursue the American dream, should not be the target of law enforcement, but then sort of left it at that.
Ben, we've talked about how elected officials have responded, how the mayor's office, has, beyond the statement from the mayor's spokesperson, has been not really part of this conversation. What has the NYPD said? Were they involved with this in any way?
So the NYPD is always clear that they do not provide support to ICE, do not engage in civil immigration enforcement. But they were out there yesterday, as they always are, just securing 26 Federal Plaza, which is the building where the immigration court is, where the FBI, it's a big federal building downtown, and it's a sort of focal point for protesters. So to the extent they were involved to protect the street outside of that building, but not involved in the actual enforcement.
Ben, thank you so much. Liz, I want to pivot to talking about some of what has led up to this debate. This is obviously a backdrop that is, very much going to be part of tonight's conversation, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that these candidates are going to be talking about. Pretty much since the last debate, Andrew Cuomo has been putting a ton of pressure on Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa to get out of the race, to suspend his campaign. He's been appearing on local talk radio and also on some podcasts. You brought a clip for us of a recent appearance of Cuomo on a podcast. Can you set this up a little bit for us?
Sure. This was Cuomo appearing with Logan Paul. He's a wrestler. I would call him like a conservative influencer, but he has quite a popular podcast that reaches a lot of young men, maybe right-leaning men. So this is the audience that Andrew Cuomo is trying to appeal to in this moment.
It's life and death, because if you don't know what you're doing or you make the wrong call, people die, right? And New York City is a national target and an international target, right?
So, Liz, this is not a typical forum for Cuomo. What do you think prompted him to go here at this point in the race?
Well, Bridget, he needs Republican voters. The polls show that he is behind Zoran Mamdani by double digits. He has Curtis Sliwa nipping at his heels because, Curtis's last debate performance, he used a lot of his time to attack Cuomo. So he has to be worried at this point that Sliwa can be a spoiler in this debate. So what he's trying to do is he's trying to consolidate all of the anti-Mamdani support. So, he's facing the Democratic mayoral nominee in Mamdani. So he's thinking, where else can I go? He's trying to win conservative Democrats, but he needs to go further to the right.
And so far, we have really heard Sliwa completely rejecting these calls for him to leave the race. I know he was just on WABC this morning, making some very strong statements about it. But you brought another piece of tape from Sliwa from a different interview he did. This is with the Nate Friedman show, where he was asked, was he okay if Mamdani wins this race because he stayed in the race? And, Sliwa's response was blasting the Democrats, and it went viral over the weekend. Let's take a listen.
So I'm supposed to help them? How come they don't help themselves? Andrew Cuomo failed everybody in that primary. He even admitted it. Now he's basically saying, I can't win without Sliwa votes. Where are your votes?
So, Liz, he's raising this question essentially about the campaign that Cuomo is running in the general, but these are the same issues that were raised about the campaign Cuomo ran during the primary, right?
Exactly, Bridget. And you hear the way he says it, that is quite a clapback to Cuomo. And, the last time I looked, I think yesterday, that clip has garnered, I think something in like upwards of 7 million views. He's basically putting to Cuomo the question, like, you have raised millions of dollars. You have a super PAC supporting you. Where is your base? Where is your base of support? And it's a completely fair question.
And at the same time, we're seeing Cuomo, who, is a longtime New York Democrat, comes from a storied family involved in Democratic politics, making these overt appeals to voters that might be otherwise considered Sliwa voters, Republican voters, appearing on WABC radio and, getting an assist from people like WABC host Sid Rosenberg, billionaire supermarket mogul John Catsimatidis calling on Sliwa to get out of this race. And yet Sliwa can point to some of the support that he is getting from some Republicans. Can you talk a little bit about that, Liz?
Absolutely. Bridget, you know the numbers, but he has done well in raising his money. He's qualified for matching funds. And again, like I said, he is coming off what was sort of a breakout debate performance where I think, I kind of see it as him crossing over from being this fixture of city politics to almost sort of a cultural icon in New York City. Just bringing up sort of reminding New Yorkers of his history, his bizarre history in the city, that
moment where he talked about, not wanting to ride in the back of a taxi cab because he had been shot by people involved with organized crime in the back of a taxi cab. That was a very New York moment. You're probably not going to find that in another debate.
Right. And he has this kind of unrepentant sort of authenticity about him that I think appeals to a lot of New Yorkers. And, it's kind of signaling what is refreshing about him to many voters. So, yes, absolutely. He's coming into this. He is coming into Saturday is the first day of early voting. And there's no doubt that he's coming in with a surge of momentum. Now, in terms of how many votes that really translates into in the city that is a deep blue city, is it 7-1, Democrats to Republicans, that's unclear. But clearly he has a base. He has high profile Republicans and the Republican Party behind him. What reason does he have to drop out of the race?
Right. Well, let's talk for a moment about Mamdani, who is going into this final debate, remaining the front runner at this point. But you wrote a story earlier this week about, questions within his own camp and an effort he's making to project a certain maturity. And, the way he's trying to address the age issue. I want to play a clip of a video the campaign released poking a little fun about that over the weekend.
This weekend, I'll be making a change. I'm turning 34, and I'm committing that for every single day from here on out, I will grow older.
So, he's making fun of the fact that his age has become such a central issue in this race. Liz, I think he was asking people to canvass for him on his birthday, something that's been very much a part of how he has run this campaign. But you wrote that there are some people in his inner circle thinking about basically how to neutralize this issue for him. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and I thought that video was a very clever way of hitting at what has been a vulnerability for him. And this is something that I've been told that Mamdani himself has wrestled with, which is how do I address these concerns about my age, which was really concerns about his experience and can he govern if he wins the election and becomes mayor? One idea that the campaign had been deliberating was whether or not they should reveal a top appointment like first deputy mayor or police commissioner before the election. Now, in recent memory, there haven't been mayoral candidates who have done that before the election. That typically happens immediately after they
Sure.
win the election. But with that said, there are ways in which a candidate, a leading candidate, or even someone who's behind and wants some traction can kind of maybe leak a pick, or maybe even just signal a pick. Like one example I was given is, when Bloomberg was running, and it was by no means that, he was a lock to win, not at all. He was an underdog. But people who watched him knew that if he did win, there was a high likelihood that Ray Kelly was going to be his police commissioner.
Sure.
Why? Ray Kelly was one of his campaign advisors on public safety. So, that
Yeah.
was there. And, with Bill Bratton, Bill Bratton did an interview in October before the November election saying that, yeah, he would like to come back and be a police commissioner. And he defended Bill de Blasio against criticisms that he was somehow anti-police. So there are things like that that a campaign can do. And clearly, Mamdani's campaign has kind of wrestled with, what do we do? Do we in fact make an explicit announcement? I think, we're getting to the final stretch. And I'm hearing that, it seems maybe more unlikely that they would do it, but I wouldn't rule it out. If they did want to do something like this, it would make sense to do it very much in the late stages of the race, to kind of when you have maximum attention. And maybe, the idea was that if does feel confident in the polls, does this announcement maybe bring him a majority as opposed to just a plurality of votes?
Sure. And when I think back on the primary debate, Mamdani, when he was on stage, name-checked some people who are considered, I think, real experts in New York City governance, as people who he would seek advice from. So it wouldn't surprise me if he name-checks some people tonight. But I'm also curious, in our last question here, Liz, what else you are going to be watching for post-debate? I mean, the big news coming out of the final debate during the primary was that alliance that formed between Mamdani and a rival candidate, City Controller Brad Lander. What do you think, anything that you're going to be keeping eyes on between now and, the start of early voting and Election Day?
Well, I guess more name checking, like you said. I think that the name checking is also a way of signaling, who will be in his cabinet, who are the people that he is as a young lawmaker, who are the people that he's relying on to sort of teach him about city government, right? So I expect a lot more than that. Mamdani has a big rally planned at the end of the month with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman, AOC, and also Bernie Sanders. I mean, I wonder, and then I wonder what Andrew Cuomo can do on the ground similarly, where he's sort of, these are the moments where you're kind of giving your sort of closing argument to voters,
Exactly.
right? So, how does Andrew Cuomo and also Curtis Sliwa sort of compete with that? We know that Mamdani can mobilize thousands of people to a rally like that. What do they do to signal that they have some sort of momentum on their side?
Well, there is lots for us to cover and report on, but we'll leave it there for now. My guests have been Ben Feuerherd, WNYC and Gothamist public safety reporter, and my colleague, politics reporter Elizabeth Kim. We're both going to be covering the debate that Brian will be moderating tonight, and we will be back here tomorrow with Brian to recap what happened. So my thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget.